My father raised his glass in the middle of a crowded Chicago restaurant and said loud enough for every relative to hear, "We wish Noreen was our only child." The laughter died mid-air. My mother didn't flinch. She just nodded like it was a fact they'd rehearsed. Noreen's smirk flashed under the chandelier, slow and deliberate, like victory. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I let the silence burn. Then I stood the scrape of my chair louder than his toast and walked out. By the time the door shut behind me, I already knew within a week they'd regret every word. People like to say family is everything. For most of my life, I believed that too. I worked hard, stayed quiet, and told myself loyalty would be enough. But loyalty means nothing when you're the invisible one at your own table. I'm Alice, 35, a financial manager in Chicago. Numbers make sense to me. Families don't. I grew up in a house where love was measured in trophies, and praise was reserved for one person, my sister Noreen. She was the golden child from the moment she could spell her name. Every report card, every photo, every compliment, they all belonged to her. My parents, Philip and Carol, adored her confidence, her smile, her so-called creativity. I learned early that my job was to fill the background quietly and not take up space. When I was 12, I won a city math competition. They forgot to show up. My mom called that night apologizing because Noreen's recital had run late. I pretended it didn't matter, but I remember how the stage lights dimmed before my parents even knew I'd been there. That memory stuck sharp and small like a splinter that never healed. As adults, nothing changed, just the price tags. My parents ran a small boutique on the edge of downtown, always one bad month away from closing. I wired them $500 a month to keep it alive, rebalance their books, fix their tax errors. They'd thank Noreen for her marketing ideas and ignore the fact that my spreadsheets were the only reason they weren't bankrupt. Noreen didn't mind. She leaned into the role they gave her, all charm and lipstick, soaking up their approval like sunlight. When we sat around the dinner table, they'd hang on every story she told about her business success, while I ate in silence, watching them orbit around her. I kept hoping that maybe one day effort would count for something, that they'd see what I'd built for them. But love in that house had a hierarchy, and I was always second place. So when my father lifted that glass at the anniversary dinner, when he said those words out loud for the world to hear, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was the finale to a play I'd been cast in since childhood. The difference was, this time I wasn't staying for the curtain call. The week before that dinner, I'd already felt something building an edge in my parents' voices, the way my mother mentioned Noreen's latest promotion every time I called. "Your sister just has such a good head for business," she'd say, as if I hadn't spent my nights balancing their failing accounts. I'd smile through the phone, whisper, "That's great," and hang up before my voice cracked. When I arrived at the restaurant for their 36th anniversary, I told myself I'd survive the night. One dinner. One performance. My family always loved an audience, and I'd learned how to sit still while they basked in their own spotlight. The place was beautiful, white linen candles flickering against the glass walls, the city stretching like a postcard behind them. Everyone was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. I took a seat at the far end of the long table, exactly where I belonged. The evening started the same way every family event did. Noreen walked in wearing red because of course she did. Heads turned. My mother's face lit up like a Christmas tree. My father clapped her shoulder and called her the pride of the family. No one noticed me quietly sipping my water. Dinner rolled on wine, pouring laughter bouncing off the walls. Every conversation circled back to Noreen, her new retail position, her marketing campaigns, her leadership. When someone asked about me, my mother said lightly, "Oh, Alice helps with the numbers sometimes," before pivoting back to Noreen's big summer sale. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I smiled. I always smiled. Then maybe out of desperation, I spoke up. I'd spent weeks analyzing the store's finances and found ways to save thousands. So I cleared my throat and said, "You're overstocking inventory. If you cut suppliers and adjust your margins, you could turn it around in 6 months." I expected curiosity, maybe respect. Instead, Noreen tilted her head and laughed softly. "That's cute," she said. "Stick to your spreadsheets, Alice." I've got real ideas." A few cousins chuckled. My mother waved a hand. "Sweetheart, let's not bore everyone with numbers." I felt the words land like stones. "I'm not trying to bore anyone," I said, my voice even. "I'm trying to save you money." Noreen smirked. That same slow, deliberate smile. "Relax. We're fine. You always worry too much." My father didn't even look at me. He just raised his wine glass and said, "Noreen knows what she's doing." That was it. The final rehearsal before the show-stopping line that would come later. Every tiny dismissal, every patronizing laugh, every time they turned to her and away from me, it all stacked up like dry tinder. I sat there, hands clasped under the table nails, digging into my palm to stay composed. The clinking glasses, the soft music, the laughter, it all blurred into a dull hum. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. When my father finally stood to give that toast, I already knew what was coming. I just didn't know how final it would feel. When the words left his mouth, "We wish Noreen was our only child." Something inside me didn't break. It went silent. That kind of pain doesn't explode, it hardens. I remember the sound of my chair scraping back the murmur that followed, and Noreen's smirk like a final stamp on the sentence. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. I just walked out, leaving my napkin folded neatly on the table, the way you'd leave behind something you no longer needed. Outside, Chicago's night air hit me like a slap-cold cutting, but somehow cleansing. The streetlights blurred through the burn in my eyes, but I didn't let a single tear fall. I stood there, coat unbuttoned, heart steadying against the chill, and I realized this wasn't just about one cruel sentence. It was years of being the backup child. Years of carrying the load no one acknowledged. When I got home, I didn't pour a drink or call a friend. I sat on my couch staring at my phone, my parents' group chat still open from earlier. My hands were steady when I typed, "I'm done helping with the store. No more money, no more advice. Good luck." Then I hit send. It was almost midnight when the first call came Dad. I watched it ring and fade to voicemail, then Mom, then Noreen. Texts started flooding in. "What is this about? Call us. Stop being dramatic." I set the phone face down and let it buzz until the battery died. The next morning, the guilt tried to creep in, but I shut it out. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and stared at the spreadsheets for my own clients, people who actually valued my expertise. For years, I'd funneled my energy into saving their store. Without me, it would crumble. I knew it. And for once, that thought didn't sting. It satisfied. By day 2, the voicemails had changed tone. Dad's voice went from confused to irritated. "You're hurting the family," he said, as if I hadn't been the one holding it together. Mom's emails grew longer, layered with guilt and half-hearted apologies. Noreen's messages were short and sharp. "You can't just walk away like this." I ignored them all. At work, my colleagues noticed a difference. I wasn't distracted anymore. I was focused lighter. When my friend Kathleen met me for coffee that weekend, she took one look at me and said, "You finally look free." She was right. For the first time, I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't the afterthought begging for scraps of approval. I was done. But the thing about taking back your power is it doesn't end with silence. It starts there. And mine had only just begun. A week after that dinner, I boarded a flight to Florida. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for days, calls, voicemails, guilt-laced texts, but I'd stopped checking them. I needed distance, not more noise. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something. My grandfather, Henry, lived in a quiet beach town near Clearwater in the same pale blue house he'd built himself 40 years ago. He was one of the few people in my family who'd ever seen me without the filter of Noreen's shadow. When I pulled up in the rental car, he was sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee watching the ocean. He looked up, saw my face, and said, "You look like hell, sweetheart. Come inside." We sat in his living room, the air heavy with salt and the hum of the old ceiling fan. For the first time in days, I let the words spill out: the dinner, the toast, the smirk, every wound that sentence had reopened. I told him about the years of $500 transfers, the unpaid hours I'd spent fixing their store's messes, and the way they still treated me like an outsider. When I finished, my throat was raw but lighter. He didn't interrupt, didn't say I'm sorry. He just nodded slowly and said, "You did everything right, Alice," and they still chose wrong. Then I showed him something else, screenshots of Noreen's Facebook posts, the ones calling me jealous, unstable, a problem. Posts that spread fast through cousins, old family friends, even mutual contacts from work. My stomach twisted every time I looked at them, but I needed him to see. Grandpa's expression changed. His jaw set the same way I'd seen it when he caught someone cheating him out of a construction deal decades ago. "That's not family," he said quietly. "That's betrayal." He stood up, walked to his desk, and pulled out a folder. His estate plans, the kind of thing he'd once discussed vaguely at Christmas dinners. He looked back at me. "I've been watching the way they treat you for years," he said. "I always thought maybe they'd grow out of it. I was wrong." He called his lawyer that afternoon. The man arrived in a dark sedan before sunset. I sat on the couch while they talked, every word grounding me further in a reality I never expected. Grandpa's voice was steady. Cut Philip, Carol, and Noreen out entirely. Leave the properties to Alice. The rest send to the local veterans charity. The lawyer nodded, took notes, and left with a handshake. Grandpa turned to me, eyes soft but firm. "You've carried that family long enough. It's their turn to stand on their own." I wanted to argue to say this was too much, but I couldn't. I'd spent years handing over my savings, my time, my peace, and they'd thrown me away in front of everyone. If anyone deserved this justice, it wasn't even about me. It was about the balance finally being restored. When I flew back to Chicago the next morning, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, quiet, focused. My phone was still full of unread messages, but I didn't need to read them to know what they said. Panic, confusion, denial. The storm I'd predicted was already forming. Within a week, the consequences hit. The first was the store. Without my $500 monthly transfers and financial guidance, the bills I'd been covering started to pile up. The vendors I used to negotiate with refused to extend credit. Then came the tax penalty, one I'd warned them about months before. They ignored it, of course. The fines hit harder than they imagined. I didn't have to say a word. Word spread through the family fast enough. One of my cousins texted me, "Did you hear about your parents' store?" I didn't reply. I just let the message sit unread the same way I'd sat unheard for years. Then came Noreen's downfall. She'd built her entire image on that store, claiming to be the creative director, even though she couldn't read a balance sheet. When the store collapsed, so did her credibility. The investors she'd been pitching to pulled out. Her shiny reputation dulled overnight. She tried to spin it online, posting cryptic messages about toxic family drama and false accusations. But people had receipts. Cousins started replying to her old posts, calling her out for the lies she'd spread about me. One even leaked proof of my monthly transfers, showing how I'd been the one keeping everything afloat. Suddenly, Noreen wasn't the golden child anymore. She was the sister who'd ruined everything. As for my parents, the fall was quieter but crueler. The bank foreclosed on their house. They moved into a cramped apartment on the west side of town. For years, they'd bragged about their family-owned business at every holiday dinner. Now they avoided family gatherings altogether. People whispered, "How could they say that about Alice? She was the one helping them, wasn't she? I didn't need to correct anyone." The truth was finally speaking for itself. Still, some nights I'd lie awake in my apartment staring at the city lights outside my window and wonder if I'd gone too far. Then I'd remember that dinner, the sound of my father's voice echoing across the room, the smirk on Noreen's face, the silence from my mother. That memory would burn the doubt away. One evening, my friend Kathleen came over with takeout and 2 glasses of wine. She listened as I told her about Florida, the will, the fallout. When I finished, she raised her glass. "To peace," she said. I hesitated, then clinked hers. "To justice," I replied. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. They'd wished me out of the family, and the universe, helped along by a few legal documents, had given them exactly that. A month later, an envelope arrived from Florida. Inside was a handwritten letter from Grandpa Henry. "It's done," it said. "The papers are signed. The properties are yours. They won't get a cent. You deserve this, Alice, for surviving them." I read it 3 times, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer, not out of pride, out of closure. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city, a soft breeze cutting through the noise of traffic below. Somewhere out there, my parents and Noreen were picking up the pieces of the world they'd built on my silence. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the invisible one anymore. The collapse came quietly, like a slow leak instead of an explosion. The boutique was boarded up within 2 months, its windows covered in dust and for lease signs. Neighbors whispered that the owners had bad luck, but everyone in the family knew the truth. Luck had nothing to do with it. Dad took a warehouse job night shifts that left him too tired to talk. Mom started selling costume jewelry online, pretending it was temporary. Noreen bounced between retail jobs, her bright red lipstick replaced by a forced smile. Their phone calls stopped eventually, though I still saw their names light up my screen, sometimes reminders of what I'd escaped. At work, my life moved forward. The startup I managed landed a major contract, and my boss hinted at a promotion. I should have felt pure satisfaction, but what I felt instead was peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop fighting for a seat at a table that never wanted you there. One afternoon, an envelope arrived from Florida again, Grandpa's handwriting shaky but strong. Inside was a note and a photograph of him on his porch, the ocean behind him. "Proud of you, kid," he'd written. "Don't waste time on people who can't see your worth." I pinned the photo to my fridge. That night, I poured a glass of wine and watched the city lights flicker outside my window. For once, I didn't think about them. I thought about what came next and how free silence could feel. Sometimes I still replay that night in my head, the toast, the smirk, the silence that followed. But now it doesn't sting. It reminds me of the moment I finally chose myself. My family's wish came true. They got the life they wanted, and I got mine back. I built a home out of peace, not approval. I learned that blood isn't always love, it's just history. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, I hope my story reminds you. Walking away isn't weakness, it's power. Tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe for more true stories like this.